everyone, it's the Sky Priestess. So, today I wanted to give you a quick heads up on what is going on in the skies right now, and more importantly, what are the best ways we can engage with these energies. Reason why I'm wearing blue today is because there is a lot of fiery activation in the skies, and I figured a little bit of blue would go a long way. And let me explain what that is about in due course. Right now, we are seeing a very powerful grand Earth trine between Uranus and Taurus, Hylonome in Capricorn, and Eris, the hunter-stalker, in Virgo. And this is a Earth trine that has been basically aspecting these bodies and influencing us for the past few weeks. It's just extremely active right now as these trine aspects are exact to each other. In other words, at their points of greatest intensity. So Hylonome, if you look at the mythology of her, was essentially the soulmate of Eris. They were centaurs. And Hylonome was deeply, deeply in love with this being. Eris as a centaur, on the other hand, was rather reckless, despite his deep love for his partner. And one day he ran into a spear and he died. And Hylonome, unable to bear the grief of separation, felt that she had to impale herself upon the spear that he died on, as she felt that she simply could not be without him. In practice, what I have observed through, I don't know how many cases I've seen so far in my career, but after seeing so many different manifestations of Hylonome, I would say it comes down to two major indicators in practice. Hylonome can indicate where a person is selling themselves short, often because of unprocessed, unresolved grief and the trauma of loss. It could be this lifetime, it could be other lifetimes, depending on how powerful that bond was. And it is a very powerful energetic backdoor, especially when Eris is intersecting with its energies at this time. The other manifestation of Hylonome tends to be through codependent patterns. Now, grief and codependency are two different things, but they can intersect. Codependent patterns are, whilst I'm not a psychologist, I can highly recommend a book called Women Who Love Too Much, and to give you a sense of what codependency is about and how it affects people of all genders. Ignore the title. It's an excellent book that applies to all, and the author says so themselves. But effectively, codependency is a particular type of dysfunction in relationships in which, once again, a person is more often than not selling themselves short, to put it very, very bluntly. It is where they end up, capitulating, end up giving up more and more and more of themselves, often to partners who are unavailable or who are facing substance addictions. Usually that's the pattern. And ultimately, these tend to help the person relive certain patterns in their own childhood that made them feel like they were not in control, or that there were many elements of their lives that they had to deny. So there are these twin driving dynamics of denial and control you see in codependent relationships, and this can also be heavily triggered right now. Now, this is not going to apply to everyone equally because different people have different experiences. But if you do feel like you're making decisions that are actually making you more vulnerable and not in a good way, if you feel like you're being led by your heart, but not necessarily by what your heart wants, but rather the trauma that your heart has felt, this is a time to take a step back. Really look at what you want as opposed to what you fear, as opposed to what you think that you desire. What you want may not be none of those things. But it'd be hard to find that space of understanding within yourself if you haven't looked inside, or if you associate your true self with the traumatic responses of the ego mind to whatever your circumstances may be. So that's the first alignment I would say is worth mentioning. The second alignment that is worth mentioning right now is, of course, the Sun. And the Sun is at 24 degrees of Libra. It's opposite Eris at 24 degrees of Aries. I used to be quite big about Eris, in the sense that, especially when you had the Uranus-Pluto squares, and I remember being very, very focused on Eris at that time, a few years back. But effectively, Eris boils down to that question of whether or not you are willing to be true to who you actually are. And in Eris's case, because she is working through the confines of a very patriarchal system that excludes her and her kin, she basically kind of goes crazy. and she sets into motion events that lead to a lot of collateral damage involving innocence. Now, I'm not saying that, having Eris in a chart or having Eris strongly aspected in a chart necessarily makes you reckless to endangerment or makes you do things in a crazy way. I have Eris very strongly aspected in my chart. But what I find through a very direct experience of Eris is that it is the challenge of how you actually find yourself and how you find your center in response to context, people, relationships, societal expectations that may try to put you in a different kind of box. Breaking through that box is fine. Burning down people all around you that had nothing to do with your imprisonment, not so good. So this is a time where we are really being asked to know that difference, that line in the sand between standing up for and against an injustice, between representing yourself and the way you ought to be treated with basic dignity, versus shooting out flaming vitriol, spewing it all over the place, especially on people who did not actually do you any harm. So therein lies different ways of different challenges with Eris. Ultimately, Eris gives us that opportunity to truly assert ourselves, but in what way is this best done and at what cost? Sometimes you can't help the collateral, but more often than not, you can in human relationships. Effectively, a little bit of fire is what can sustain a home, is what can keep warmth going in a household. Too much of it, and you just end up burning everything and everyone around. And whilst from a cosmic perspective, that's part of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, but from an interpersonal human perspective, that can be very damaging. So this is extremely important right now, finding this balance in how you want to express yourself, understanding the consequences of those actions around you, and how they impact your personal relationships, because Eris is opposed to the Sun right now. And it doesn't just deal with personal relationships, it also deals with professional connections, long-term friendships, and any kind of contract in which you are a part of, which includes a social contract. So these are really times where we are needing to explore the truth of who we are in very profound ways. Now, the Sun and Eris opposition are also reinforced by the fact that the Sun is currently on the mean south node and Eris is on the mean north node. So that maxim of "to thyself be true" is highlighted even strongly, even stronger in the skies. I'm fairly tired because it's been a long day, so slurring a little bit, but I'm making sure I'm getting all the points. But effectively, with the South Node conjunct the Sun, we are likely to see old relationships, situations of old karmic dynamics come up at this time. And again, we are challenged to respond in a way that is true to the essence of who we are. And much like in the case of dealing with Hylonome and Therius and Uranus, it is about looking at our traumas and the reactions our traumas seek to inspire in us versus what it is we truly are, what it is we truly desire, what it is our innermost heart is calling out for at this time. And it's so easy to mistake the voice of the ego and the voice of the spirit, especially when one feels pain. But that is one of the key aspects of spiritual maturation on this path and on this journey. But effectively, yeah, some of you are going to be really thinking about or seeing old patterns come up from the past, and sometimes you need to burn the shit down. But for others, the South Node can bring unexpected gifts. It may be the celebration of old ties and the kind of comfort that actually allows you to feel happy to be who you are in relation to someone who appreciates you just as you appreciate them. It can go different ways, especially as the nodes are rather unpredictable. That comes down to your personal karma and how you navigate things. So for some people, a nice warm affirmation of selfhood, and for others, it might be a much more conflictual case of needing to burn the shit down. Just bear in mind, whatever you do need to do, you don't need to do it with malice. You don't need to do it with very toxic anger. Righteous anger is perfectly fine. But just bear in mind that those kinds of actions do come at a high cost, especially in interpersonal relationships. So you got to make sure that that is what you truly need. Let's see. Those are really the key alignments right now. And navigating those things are already hard enough without all of these things prodding at everyone. But I do want to point out that we are also going to be seeing on October the 19th Saturn at 0 degrees Pisces opposite Juno. I call her the soul awakener, others call her the soulmate, it all works. But Juno, she who awakens the soul at 0 degrees of Virgo. And without wanting to get into a too large a discussion, I would say that the decisions we are making now not only further our spiritual paths in particular directions, but they also set into place who we want to walk those paths with. Just remember that everything in your life is some reflection of your spirituality. Spirituality isn't something that you do at a set time per day. It's not something that only gets activated when you bring out your stones or your chants or your tools. Spirituality is something that transcends all aspects of life. Every decision you make, how material it may seem, is ultimately still a spiritual decision at a certain level. And the people that you are bringing into your life at this time and those you are walking away from have a very profound influence upon the road that you spiritually take. And sometimes it can be very hard to let go of some people, especially if you've known them for a very long time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are ready to journey with you where you are at. And sometimes you may be the person that gets walked away from. It is really very, very relative. In some cases, some will be celebrating and strengthening certain soulmate connections, especially if they are able to share and hold together the essence of a path with spirit that all parties benefit from and are enlivened by. But how this happens again comes down to the individual situation. But in a nutshell, these are some of the more, I would say, delicate yet very powerful alignments that are happening at this time. And that's what I wanted to share. Take care. Very many blessings. Ciao, ciao for now. Bye-bye.